Hurricane Earl continues to strengthen as it heads directly towards the northern Leeward Islands. I'm Mike Naso from IPR365.com with an update on this dangerous hurricane making its progression across the Atlantic Basin. Here's the satellite the last few days. You can see Danielle moved out, Earl moved in, and hot on its trails is Invest 97L. This could become a hurricane down the road, and I'll show you the European model later, but it doesn't go quite as far out as some of the stuff we've seen, and quite frankly, the European model takes this all the way towards the Gulf of Mexico as a catastrophic hurricane by the time, 939 millibars, technically a Category 4 pressure, but if that transpired, it'd be a catastrophic situation. That's a long way down the line. Right now the system's not looking too good, but that's going to keep it in the low-level flow, which could keep it much further west down the line. And I do eventually think, by the way, a track like that's going to occur with it, but I'll talk about that later. And right now you can see the Atlantic Basin, we got a lot of troughiness out there helping to push on out Danielle, and that's going to help weaken the ridge and eventually push on out Earl. However, this system here could come under the radar and be something we got to deal with. More off Africa after that. It's a mess out there, but those who love tropical weather were wondering, when is it going to get active? Well, you got your wish. Now it is. So let's get down to brass tacks, because that's what we're dealing with Hurricane Earl. As of 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Hurricane Earl is at 17.6 north, 59.5 west. Winds were 85 miles per hour, gusting to 105 miles per hour. The pressure is down to 978 millibars, but it keeps falling, and the next aircraft, by the time you see this update, winds and pressure could be stronger. The winds could get up, and the pressure could be a lot lower than it is now. In fact, by some of the measurements, they measured at a certain millibar level out there, looking like it could be down towards 972, 970 by now. Regardless, it's going to strengthen into a major hurricane overnight tonight and into tomorrow, a Category 1, 2, 3 hurricane, just as it rakes those islands there, then become a Category 4 by Tuesday. So in the short term, this little cone here, Category 1 hurricane to a Category 4. Okay? Monday night, minimal. Tuesday night, extreme. Okay, now when you look at it from that perspective, it doesn't seem so comical as just a hurricane spinning out there. That's a very serious situation to have any hurricane this close. And to think that this thing came right off Africa at that high latitude, and that it's going to be a Category 4 hurricane just a few hundred miles to the east of the Abaco Islands, West Palm Beach, Florida, that is a scary prospect. Thank goodness that we're going to have a trough move off, slide that ridge to the east. We're already seeing it coming around the southern periphery. We're going to have that. We got enough troughiness, enough weakness to push this hurricane out. Thank goodness that there's not a rebuilding ridge. Because if you extend this hurricane with a rebuilding ridge out, you'd be talking about a landfall somewhere in the southeastern United States as a Category 4 hurricane. Okay? Hugo, 1893, Andrew, something like that. So Earl, we're going to luck out on the East Coast. We're not going to luck out in the way of high swells, and we can't yet rule out a direct landfall, especially from, say, Cape Fear, North Carolina, all the way up to Maine. We can't rule that out yet. Cape Cod, I'd be watching, because if this does end up just a little bit on the left side of this cone, and then it does end up making the turn, it could still cross the Cape, and by that time it's still going to be a much more spread out hurricane, but still over 100 miles an hour by Friday. You can see a Cat 2 forecast by the NHC. That's not going to be good news at all. I did want to get to the watches and warnings, and this is a very jingoistic map because it only shows the United States watches and warnings, which are hurricane watch and tropical storm warning for the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. But because we do have this serious hurricane threat to the other islands and the governments of those islands, I did want to alert you to what we have in effect at this time, so bear with me. We do have a hurricane warning in effect for Antigua, Barbuda, Montserrat, St. Kitts, Nevis, and Anguilla, St. Martin, and St. Barthélemy, another St. Martin, Saba, and St. Eustatius, and the British Virgin Islands. I already mentioned the hurricane watch for the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, and that's also a tropical storm warning. Now, hurricane warning for those islands in this area in red I just circled means that hurricane conditions are expected in the next 12 to 24 hours. With this hurricane, 12 to 24, normally just 24. Regardless, you can see obviously as the hurricane pushes west-northwest, it's going to be very close to see if the eye wall rakes any of those islands and just what occurs with it. I do want to show you the radar of the hurricane real quick because that gives you a better impression of where the eye is. You can see Hurricane Earl coming on screen now, the eye getting better organized, moving like this. Some of these little islands here may well be in the path up here. That's the concern right now. But regardless, look at this feeder band here spinning into our departing hurricane. That's going to cause some problems rainfall wise, and you don't want a lot of that heavy rain in those mountainous regions. The model guidance with Hurricane Earl has been pretty straightforward. The Canadian, which I'll show you in a little bit, is to the left here. We also have the UK Met pretty far to the left, Hurricane Center in the middle with the consensus that this will eventually begin to move northwest, then north-northwest, then north-northeast, northeast, and finally out. However, it's going to look like that on satellite, a lot bigger than those circles I drew, and it's going to be a very intense hurricane. So if you're looking off your local forecast satellite radar range in Cape Hatteras on, say, I don't know, Wednesday, Thursday, you're going to be seeing this massive hurricane right there, but it's probably going to be moving away from you, which will be good news. But you're going to have high riptides, beach erosion, high surf. We've already lost lives, not from this hurricane, but from Danielle, which I'll talk about in a minute. I'm getting tired of Danielle, we all are, but it did cost people their lives in areas of the mid-Atlantic because of the high surf. This was, this is what we're dealing with these hurricanes. It's not all about landfalls. It could be indirect impacts causing problems too. Here's the latest visible satellite imagery of Hurricane Earl. Look at that. Look at the eye wall bubbling here. This is a bursting CDO, central dense overcast. Look at the bursting here of the convection. This is not good. This means Hurricane Earl is strengthening. This means Hurricane Earl is going to pass the islands as a strengthening hurricane, probably of at least 100 miles an hour at this point. So, this is what we're dealing with. But again, if it misses the islands, if the eye wall misses those islands, we don't have to deal with the winds. 2 years ago, Hurricane Omar went like this. It was a Category 4. Didn't do a lot of damage because none of the islands got in that Category 4 eye wall. If they had, Omar would be a lot more famous down there than he is to just hurricane nerds like myself. However, you take a hurricane like George or Luis, which rake through the islands as Category 3 and 4 hurricanes, you got a problem. Maryland, 95, ask folks down here in the Leeward and Windward Islands, ask them, Maryland 95, oh yeah, they remember. Ask them up here, oh yeah, I remember Maryland well. Why did they remember it? It was only a Cat 2? Because it was strengthening as it was moving through. Did it hit the U.S.? No. But is it historic? Yes. That's why Earl needs to be watched. This thing might only be a Category 2 moving through. It might just rake some of the islands. It might never hit the U.S. But trust me, when a hurricane is strengthening when it's coming ashore, it's a heck of a lot worse than one that's holding steady or weakening. And that satellite there is one scary-looking hurricane for late August. 5 years after Katrina, we're dealing with Earl. A hurricane much less than Katrina, but still a hurricane and still threatening somebody. Alright, now that I got that little novel piece out of the way, let me talk here about the large satellite view. You can see there's Earl looking very well defined. Here's Danielle way up here off screen moving out. I did want to give you the latest on Hurricane Danielle. It is at 38.0 north, 54.5 west. Winds are 80 miles an hour. It's moving north-northeast at 28. Out of here, 977 millibars. We're not going to have to deal with Danielle anymore whatsoever. And actually, if you look at the satellite imagery, this is not Danielle. This is our other system, Invest 97L, which you can see is looking pretty ragged, but it's out there. And then this twisting here is not going to go away, and when it gets towards more favorable environment and warmer water, we could well see development of it, and that's going to be what we're dealing with right now. You can see here's the model guidance for it. and it clearly is moving just south of due west. The model's still taking it in the general vicinity of where Earl is, but turning it back west. A lot of them are. You can see the consensus here is that it's going to kind of jaunt back west. And the long-range European does show it end up in the Gulf of Mexico as a Category 4 hurricane. Now, again, that's a long way out. You want to take that with a grain of salt, but I'm telling you, got to watch this one carefully because this one is tenacious. And when they're tenacious like this, they tend to like to stick around a lot. Now, here's the Canadian model, and you can see it takes Earl up, and here comes 97L. And that's a little bit to the left of the Hurricane Center track with Earl. This here is the GFS, and you can see it brings Fiona, what will be Fiona, up and out in the wake of Earl. And this is the European out as far as it goes, showing another Hurricane Ike. Same area, very intense hurricane bearing down on northeastern Cuba. It crosses all of Cuba and comes back out and bombs out in the Gulf of Mexico, heading generally towards Louisiana or Texas in the longer range. Now, take that with a grain of salt, but that's why, even though the focus is on Earl, we cannot forget that we do have 97L out there to watch as well. So that's basically what we're dealing with those two systems. Danielle, Earl, 97L is a different story. We're going to keep an eye on that one, just in case something does happen. You can see wind shear is no problem for our systems. 97L will have no problem. Earl shouldn't have any problems until later on. Danielle's out of here. I didn't even put a satellite image of Danielle because it's so far out there. It's not even worth wasting any more of your time blabbing on about. But Earl is. And if you are in the areas of the British and Virgin Islands, of the United States Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, any of those islands, even on the eastern seaboard, Bermuda and New England, you need to keep an eye on Hurricane Earl because right now it is a serious situation. I'm Mike Naso from Internet Partnership Radio. I'll have more later on dangerous Hurricane Earl. Stay tuned.